Welcome to Saturday's Warrior, proud member and BYU representative of the College Huddle. And with us today, we have Karter Baughan of the Church Ball Pod to join us to talk about BYU and the upcoming Big 12 tournament, as well as March Madness a little bit, and to get an idea of what to expect and what BYU needs to accomplish going forward here to position itself in the tournament. So, Karter, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to hop on. You know, the calendar turns March. Nothing gets more exciting than talking about conference basketball, March Madness just around the corner. I mean, just think about this. 7 days from now, we're going to be filling out brackets, sitting there. Every BYU fan listening to this is going to have BYU in their Final Four at this point, probably being like, yeah, they can beat Auburn. It doesn't matter. I cannot wait for it. It's the best time of the year. I'm happy to be here, happy to talk BYU hoops in the Big 12. Thanks for having me on.
You make a really good point. This year I don't have to, for my fantasy bracket or my kind of stretch one, having BYU making it to the Sweet 16, thinking, I don't know. We can feel good that BYU has a realistic shot to make the Sweet 16, as well as make an even deeper run in there. Like, you feel like this team is set up and positioned as well as about anybody in the country to do that. But right now, we're still kind of seeing some jockeying in the seeding for March Madness. I think earlier today, and it may have changed. Actually, I've seen a couple things. I feel like when I started the day, it was like I've seen 7. I think I've seen as high as 5 now from some of the the bracketologists out there. So what are you seeing from BYU in terms of where you think realistically they'll be in seeding, and what is it that they need to still do or show the committee to better position themselves?
Yeah, I think to better position themselves, it sounds simple, it's lame. They just got to win their games ahead of them. If they can beat Iowa State, a healthy Iowa State team again on a neutral site, and if they could somehow pull off an upset against Houston on a neutral site, I think that firmly puts them in the 5 seed line. The other thing, it's always difficult when you try to project BYU seeding stuff in the NCAA tournament, is the whole Sunday rule of it. So it limits so much. So BYU can only be in 2 different regions. They can only go to half of the first round sites. They can only play on Thursday. So you have to have this weird, and the committee has no problem bumping BYU down a seed line because of that. We saw that last year where BYU should have been a 5, got bumped down to a 6 to play Duquesne in the first round. We know how that one went, unfortunately. But I think what I'm seeing right now, BYU at the moment, in my mind, when you put all the consensus and all the million bracketologists and what they're saying, they feel like a 6 seed, pretty solid 6 seed right now. And I don't think they can go lower than 7 anymore, especially if they're playing Iowa State on Thursday at the Big 12 tournament. But I think they can go as high as 5. I don't think they can reach that 4 line, which is okay. I don't think that's the end of the world, to be honest. 5-4, it's kind of semantics at that point. But the key is if BYU can get to that 5 line and then you're in a favorable spot against one of these lower tier 1-seeded teams, I think it's important if BYU, if they want to make a deep run, you got to avoid the teams like Florida and you got to avoid the teams like Duke, because I think those are the top upper echelon of teams that I just don't see people beating. I don't see them getting upset in March Madness.
Okay, that was really good. So I want to go back to the Sunday thing real quick. So the regions, because something I always thought and assumed, but I don't think it's the case, is that I thought half of all the 1 through 16 seeds would play on one day and half of them, but it's not always the case, because sometimes you have like 3 5 seeds might play on Friday and only 1 5 seed on a Thursday. Is that right? And so what are the regions that BYU is kind of realistically going to be placed in? Location is and how is that, do you think, going to impact it if they are going to move up to a 5 seed?
That's a great question, because this is, just buckle up here because it's a lot right now. So first round sites, BYU can go to Lexington, they can go to Providence, Wichita, Denver. Those are the only 4 sites BYU can go to, and it has to adjust with also the Sweet 16 region where they're playing on Thursday, Saturday, which ends up being San Francisco and Newark, New Jersey. And most likely Newark is going to have Duke in it because Duke's going to prefer to play New York City. They have a huge fan base there. And then the way it's shaping out right now is there's no West Coast team. There's not your usual Gonzaga up there right now. So the last number 1 seed out of the 4 number 1s is going to end up getting slotted in the West region in San Francisco at that point. So BYU, they can only go to those 4 first-round places, and then San Francisco and in Newark. And the way it's shaping up, so if they end up getting to that 5 line, they're probably going to be in that same area as Duke, or at this moment, according to Joe Lunardi, Florida. If they end up in that 7 region, then it makes things a little weird because, Texas Tech is in there. The NCAA tournament doesn't want there to be conference matchups in the round of 32, if at all possible. It can happen. I would be honestly surprised if it did happen. So I think if BYU ends up as a 6, so I'll break it down to make it a little more simple so I'm not flying all over the place. If BYU is a 7 seed, I think they get slotted with either Alabama or Tennessee, whoever ends up going to Lexington in that 2 line right there. If BYU is a 6 seed, I think they end up with Texas A&M in either Wichita or Denver. And I think if BYU is a 5, they end up probably going to Denver in the same region as either Florida or Duke.
Okay. All right. So that's very insightful. I appreciate that because I know that's all out there, but it's hard to track all that. And
it's a disaster. I feel bad for all these bracketologists because they're like, wait, there's this Sunday rule now, because they're having to jumble all these different things, automatic qualifiers, quad. What does a quad even mean at this point? And they're actually able to and now they have to deal with the BYU Sunday rule of it all. So it's a headache, but I think we got it there. I think we got there.
Okay. So now, having said all that, what do you think would be the best case scenario? Because in some ways, obviously, like for me, I think about an 8-9. Like if that's what's going to happen, I'd rather BYU get bumped down to a 10 and play a 10-7 matchup than be 8-9, and then your reward is playing a number 1 seed in that next round. So is there kind of an ideal situation where we like to see BYU shake out?
It's tough because you look at college basketball this year and you go, there's just a lot of good teams right now. You even look at like the 7 seeds right now. And you go, Ole Miss is a good team, a team that already beat BYU on a neutral court. You go, okay, you look at a team like Louisville. Louisville's dangerous. They're a team that could go to the Elite Eight. So there's a lot of good teams in college basketball. I would say the most favorable matchup for BYU would honestly be Texas A&M if they end up being in that 6-3 game, or if they can somehow, some way find themselves. What the goal is to get to the 5 line. If they can get to the 5 line and end up with, honestly, in my opinion, any of these Big Ten teams that aren't Michigan State or Maryland, I think you're in a pretty good spot. Purdue's been on a downward spiral right now. I think BYU matches up very well against a team like Purdue. If they somehow matched up with them, I think that's a really, really, really good matchup for BYU. That's where you want to be. You'd like to avoid the top 1s and the 2s as much as possible. I'd be honestly pretty shocked if BYU fell into the 8-9 spot. So I think they're pretty safe there, but you kind of want them being in a 6 or a 5 for a favorable matchup.
Okay. And I guess the other thing I was thinking, like if they make it as a 5, would it be a stretch and they'd be the bottom 5 and maybe get a less favorable draw? Or would you think that their region would be pretty much set versus being like the top 6 and then getting maybe perhaps more favorable?
I haven't dove into like the balancing act of it. I think so much of it would just rely on, okay, can they play on Thursday, Saturday in the first round? And then can they play on Thursday, Saturday in the Sweet 16? If those line up, I don't think they really care where they slot BYU, the tournament committee that is. I think they're just going to put them wherever fits, honestly, with their seed line. And as long as they're not playing on Sunday, they try to accommodate that as best as possible. So I think it's just wherever they get slotted, and the Sunday thing, it really does hurt them at times, but I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is, and honestly, it does hurt usually more than not, but it's also it's part of the church's church's mission, and as well as it really helps, I think, promote that with the school and having those beliefs, even though a lot of people find it annoying that they have to work around it. But Are there any teams that are ranked near or around BYU that could potentially, if they win or lose, affect how BYU's seeding is? There, like, give us somebody to root for in some of these other conference tournaments.
So someone you want, I would go with teams you want to hate watch, as I like to call it. You look at them, you're going, okay, you're looking at Oregon. They play Indiana in the Big Ten tournament this week. You want a team like Oregon to go down. St. Mary's in the WCC. I don't think that should be very hard for BYU fans to cheer against. You want to cheer against St. Mary's in the WCC. I'm going through the bracket here right now. The problem is, and then when you get into the SEC teams, there's just no bad losses in the SEC. Everything is roses, and you can't hurt your resume at all. So there's not even a point of not wanting to root for those SEC teams. And then those are kind of the main ones, maybe UCLA a little bit, but just those teams hovered around BYU. You just want them to lose this week in the conference tournaments. But it all comes down to if BYU can get that win against Iowa State, I think they lock themselves in as no worse than a 6. And if they somehow pulled off the win against Houston, I don't think they're anything worse than a 5.
Wow, that is incredible. So BYU still has a lot to play for in this tournament because, as we know, the tournaments, there's less and less focus on the conference tournaments lately, and some teams don't even, take it seriously. They don't worry about it. They'd rather rest up and stay healthy. But BYU has a lot to play for, and they're really jiving right now. So you expect them to come in full throttle into this tournament?
I would expect so, because I don't think Kevin Young and this team know anything different. And on top of that, Kelvin Sampson has been noted that, hey, I'm not a big fan. I don't care that much about the conference tournaments. I'm all about being healthy for March Madness, and which I think needs to be BYU fans' number one priority. Is you saw Richie get that rolled ankle last night against Utah, and he seems like he's going to be fine. But you go, okay, that just can't happen right now. He's got to be healthy going into March Madness. Every single one of these dudes, get Cannon Catchings healthy, get all these dudes healthy for March Madness. No more injuries. That's priority number one. Number two is then you can improve your seed line a little bit. And it's just a gauntlet in the Big 12. You got to go Iowa State, Houston, and most likely Texas Tech. That's 3 brutal games to win this conference tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. But like you were saying with the SEC, out of those matchups, there's really no bad one. Like BYU can't really hurt themselves, can they? I mean, perhaps if they get blown out, is that? Do you see that affecting their seed line?
I don't even think getting blown out, especially against a team like Houston, I don't think that would even affect their seed line, to be honest. BYU's playing with house money in this tournament, in my opinion.
I love it. Okay, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about this tournament. I want to dive in a little bit and make it more fun. One of my, we all as BYU fans are so happy to be in a meaningful conference with playing meaningful games. And so part of the fun is following along the conference with these other teams. And so I want to quickly talk through this bracket. And I'm not even sure if this is going to be, no, that's not even super visible. So I'm trying to pull it up here. Maybe, I don't even think they're going to be able to read that very well on the screen, but go through some of these games, each one, and kind of what we expect to see. And perhaps, much like you were saying, who should we be hate watching? What do we not want to see? I'm also a little curious, like, is there a chance for the Big 12 to perhaps pick up an additional bid for the conference, and who might that be, and what would we need to see happen for that, while still obviously not adversely impacting BYU? Obviously that's top priority, but what as Big 12 fans should we want to see from this tournament?
Big 12 fans, you just want to see close games and buzzer beaters. I was at the Big 12 tournament last year, and it was just boring game after boring game after boring game with blowouts. And I think there was one close game, and it was Tuesday, Cincinnati versus West Virginia. If you're a BYU fan, you're just watching these other games. They don't really affect you at this point, even with the quad and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily affect you too much. So just sit back, grab some popcorn, and just watch some good March basketball and hope for a buzzer beater to watch at the end of the second half, because you look at the teams that are playing on Tuesday, none of them really have tournament hopes at this point. And so it's really, really tough for teams like that. And then you're looking at the next round with Iowa State, West Virginia, Baylor, and Kansas. they're all teams that are basically locks for the Big 12 or for the NCAA tournament. So it's tough because you go, okay, none of those dark horse teams are super, super desperate in this tournament. All the desperate teams are coming on Tuesday, and which makes you think, okay, who can make that NC State-like run out of the Big 12? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Who is that team you think could make that run?
Well, so who is out? Like, is West Virginia in or out?
West Virginia, all the top 8 seeds in the Big 12,
Okay.
they're in the tournament. They're in March Madness.
Okay. I knew they were kind of borderline for a little bit. So when I look at this, I mean, it's hard to say. I would say based on like K-State's run that they did there in the middle of the season until BYU had their say, they showed that they're capable of beating big teams. They could pull like an NC State sort of thing, but how they've been playing lately, I'm not convinced that they're going to. Another one is, Cincy, and maybe it's just because they blew out BYU. Like I saw some good things from them, but obviously they've also struggled a lot. So I don't know if there is a team, perhaps a UCF, even a Utah. I mean, they played some teams tough. Of course, that was in Utah. So I don't know. I'm not sure I see the path for it. I think because the Big 12, those teams at the top are so good that I think they'd have a hard time, even if they managed to win a couple games. Once you get to those teams that had the double bye, I just don't know if I see a big upset happening there.
It's tough, and we talk about like, okay, who can make this NC State like run? Well, it happened once, and we've done these conference tournaments like this and these big conferences for 9-10 years now, and it hasn't happened. Nobody went 5 games in 5 days before this NC State team, so it's almost impossible to pick. I think you're right. I think it would be K-State or Cincinnati, because I also think with these teams, it's got to be a mix of they have nothing to lose and their coaches are coaching for their lives. So they're just going all in and saying, hey, guys, let's just go shock the world. Kansas State is one of those, and then also Cincinnati's the other one. Like you said, Jerome Tang, I feel like, is coaching for his job right now, and Wes Miller at Cincinnati feels like he is. And two programs that haven't had a shortage of NIL money to compete. They have a decent amount of talent on these rosters, and we've seen it in spurts this year, like you were saying, where Kansas State, they went on that run, and you go, this team is really, really good. And then it's just a team that weirdly just plays to the competition to the nth degree. And then with the Cincy thing, they blow out BYU. They have the capabilities of knocking off these big-time teams, and they even made a run last year in the Big 12 tournament. It's been a really disappointing season for them. But, man, when you look at it, you go, okay, you got to beat Oklahoma State, then Iowa State, then BYU, then Houston, and then probably Texas Tech or Arizona in the title game. I just don't see it with these teams on Tuesday.
Yeah, and even just to get to that that third day, that third round, I mean, I don't know. I mean, a lot of these are still tough games. I mean, Baylor, perhaps. I mean, I guess any Iowa State. That would be my reason against Cincy, is trying to get through Iowa State. Like on Saturday, the way they handled business with K-State. Even after that long game, and saw BYU come out and struggle a little bit, and Iowa State, they didn't. I mean, of course, they didn't. Get stuck halfway across the country. Somewhere else, but they came in and they just handled things, and I think that they are going to be tough. The one thing, UCF and Utah, they go through Kansas, who has looked obviously very beatable at times, and Utah beat them once, and so that might be a win right there. Arizona has shown moments of weakness. That could be a chance, but like you were saying, then to get through, you'd be having to get through Arizona, then Texas Tech, and then either BYU or Houston or Iowa State at that point.
Yeah.
So, it looks pretty rough. What out of these first rounds are there? So you think Cincy would be favored out of that, or what would you expect to see with those two teams?
Yeah, I would take Cincy over Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's had some weird frisky wins that people don't realize. Like, wait, they beat Iowa State. And, Iowa State obviously wasn't fully healthy or anything, but I would still think Cincinnati's favored in that game, and I would pick Cincinnati to win that one. And then you go down the line, TCU, Colorado. I think Colorado is by far the worst team in this conference. TCU has shown signs that, hey, they can compete, but it just hasn't been consistent, hasn't come together really this season. So I think it's fairly chalk in the first part, except I think UCF does take down Utah. I almost feel bad for some of the Utah. Not almost. I do feel bad for the Utah players on that roster, and not just because they lost to BYU or whatever last night. It's a tough situation those kids are put in right now. That okay, 2 weeks ago, the guy you committed your future to saying, "Hey, I'm coming to play for you," gets fired when during a season which I think they've overachieved. I thought they were the worst team in the Big 12 coming into this year. The fact that they're close to 500 even says something for me. And then, which I think they made the right move. I think Alex Jensen and copying BYU's format is going to be a thing we're going to see, not just Utah copy, but schools throughout Power 5 doing as well. But those guys, man, they're in a tough spot, and they're the whole time they're sitting there thinking right after games, they go, I mean, does this even matter? Like, I'm going to have to hit the portal the second the season ends because this new coach, Alex Jensen, he's probably going to want to dive into the portal. I don't know if he's going to want me coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. That is a tough spot for any of these guys when they're in that. And we'll see, there might be more of that after the tournament, like you said, and some coaches coaching for their lives here. So, yeah, I think you're probably right with those ones. I look at this, and I guess going back to my other question, I was just looking at Kansas. Do you think there's a chance for Kansas to drop down further in the seeding based on how they do, or move up and kind of solidify a better seed?
I think there's a real world where we could end up seeing UConn versus Kansas in the first round of the tournament. If UConn falls out against like a Villanova in the Big East tournament, and then Kansas falls to Utah or UCF, I think it's absolutely a real possibility Kansas could fall a seed line. They're currently a projected 7 seed, and if they lose another one of these, I would assume this is quad 2, quad 3 kind of game. It's just a game you shouldn't lose, especially 20, 30 minutes from your campus. This was the Kansas Invitational for so many years. If they lose on Wednesday, they're dropping a seed line, and I just don't really see it with this Kansas team in March Madness. Big 12 tournament, anything can kind of happen depending on how bought in a lot of these teams are. But with Kansas, they just don't have the shooting to get it done, in my opinion. When your 3 of your best players are 0 threats from beyond 10 feet on the court, it's pretty easy to defend a team like that.
Yeah. What about of these other top seeds? Like, are there any, or I guess really any of these teams, like, do we think that, because obviously it benefits BYU, it benefits the Big 12 as a whole to have more teams advance because there's bigger payout for it, but also just in terms of the brand and saying, we're the best conference. Because last year we were claiming to be the best conference, did not have a great tournament. Some of that was due to health and other things and whatever, but it would be great and do a lot for the Big 12 right now to come out and have a really good showing. So are there any other teams that's like, hey, you know what, if BYU can't win, it would be really good for the conference if this team won, because we think that that's going to put them in a good situation come March Madness?
Yes and no. Maybe Texas Tech, because then Texas Tech would solidify a 2 seed line. But I think with maybe just 1 win over Baylor, they're looking at that, because it's kind of tricky too with the committee, because the committee is just a bunch of old farts that aren't watching enough basketball, and they're just getting paid ridiculous amounts of money to sit there and make financial decisions, essentially, because they already basically have their bracket come Friday afternoon, and then they just move the pieces depending on automatic qualifiers. And so, which that kind of stinks. If there is a team that I had to pick that would help, BYU and help the conference as a whole, if they were to win it, I would probably lean towards any of the Tuesday teams. I just don't see that happening. Maybe a team like Baylor, who's technically on the bubble, but they seem pretty safely into me. And, a team like Baylor going through would just show how deep the conference is.
Okay. All right. So root for close games and maybe a Baylor or somebody making a deeper run, right?
Or for it to blow wide open for BYU. Cincinnati upsets Iowa State, and then all of a sudden West Virginia upsets Houston, and all of a sudden BYU's like, we got a great path to the Big 12 tournament final right here. That's the other thing you might want to root for. But then on the flip side of that, BYU plays Cincinnati, then you're risking, hurting your resume a little bit.
Right, because if you lose that, like Iowa State, there's no harm. Like you said, they're playing with house money, but Cincy, that could hurt, because then you've lost to Cincy
Mhm.
twice in the season. Yeah, that's a good point. One thing about Houston, you'd already mentioned Kelvin Sampson, is if maybe they're not taking it as seriously, maybe they're resting some guys, maybe they're not, throwing everything at BYU. Maybe that's a chance for BYU to go in and have a really quality win over Houston, who's maybe not as locked in.
I think that's a great point too, because I think a lot of these guys on this team, and I'm sure every BYU fan can attest to this as well. The physicality that BYU had in that first Houston matchup to now is night and day. These guys, Kevin Young, I think after one of the games, he's like, BYU doesn't get bullied. We are the bullies now at this point. They are a really physical team at this point, and that's something I would not have said come January when you lose to Utah, TCU, and Houston. You get punked by Houston by 30 points, and I think BYU would very much welcome a rematch against Houston. Now, I don't know if BYU wins that game necessarily, but I think BYU and this coaching staff would love to see how they'd fare in a rematch against that team.
Oh, I know I would, especially when it can't really hurt you. I would love
Mhm.
to have another crack at Houston because, like you said, this team is just they're playing. It's a different team than what played Houston. Uh, when was it? Just a couple months ago, and so
Mhm.
I would love to see that, and it would really give us a better gauge of where BYU's at and what level they're going to be able to play. And the other thing too is I talked about this on another video, but with BYU and with some of those tough losses early in the season, like man, they sting. Like Houston, it was what it was. Like they're really good. BYU just didn't have it. Whatever games like that happen against good teams. But like the TCU, the Utah, even the Texas Tech, like those games hurt, and it's like, oh man, look at how BYU did. Imagine if they'd done that, but been able to pull those out. But I think BYU is who they are now because they went through those games. They took those lumps and they were able to learn from them. And and that's something that, as we've all talked about. Kevin Young talking about, yeah, next year we got to have a tougher out of conference schedule to really help the guys, go through some things and grow and be challenged a little bit early on. We also know some of that's AJ DeBonsa, and we want big time marquee matchups. So that's also part of it. But yeah, so I think BYU, having lost a lot of those games, they've learned a lot, they've toughened up, and I think had they pulled those out, I mean, maybe that would have showed that they had the mental toughness at the time. But I think there's something with losing and going from that, and like then you're recommitting. It's easier or I don't know. You go back and say, "Oh, we lost this game. Why did we lose?" And you really have to go back and look at things. Whereas if you win, you're like, "Hey, look, we're figuring it out," and maybe they don't go back to the same level. Or maybe I'm overthinking it, but I do think there's something to be said about going through those losses and now being able to learn from them.
100%. I couldn't agree more. This team, it's not even, you watch this team and if you went back, I mean, I haven't done this yet, and I think I might this week, just to remind myself of how far this team has come in such a short time. Just think about the offense that was being ran in early Big 12 play. It was a lot of ISO heavy. We were one of the slowest paced teams in the country with the personnel that BYU has at this moment. It doesn't make any sense how they were playing so slow and so lethargic and just ugly basketball, if we're going to be 100% honest. And I think the coaching staff and the players would agree at that point that it wasn't what it is now, which is this free flowing style of basketball. And I think that losing those games made them realize, like, hey, we got to step it up. We can't, we're better than this. We know our talent. We know who we are. And Kevin Young mentioned it in the press conference last night. He goes, you know what? Like, looking back at this season, we had to realize we know who we are. We're better than that. I looked at the other teams in college basketball, and I look at my guys and I go, I'd take my guys just about against just about anyone in all of college basketball at this point. And I think the players agree with the players bought into that. The coaching staff bought into that. And as a result, we're seeing what we're seeing now. And it's such a credit to Kevin Young and this coaching staff once again, because in NIL era, I mean, you look at some of these other teams, look at Kansas State right now. Yeah, they had that cute little run for a little bit, but all these dudes are getting tons of NIL money. but they're there to get a paycheck. And a lot of these guys here are here for the team and to win first, even before that paycheck, which is a huge testament to the coaching staff and the culture they've created.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see that with the guys, and even the guys that aren't getting playing time, usually they're the ones cheering the hardest and the loudest. And you see that in all the footage, well, on the side, on the bench, on the sideline, but also in the locker rooms and stuff. Because you see Elijah Crawford, he's right there, and you're thinking, oh no, we're gonna, this guy maybe he's not gonna be happy. A lot of freshmen don't come in and play in college. That's pretty normal, but he, so you can tell he's bought in. We've seen Trey Stewart kind of show the true commitment, and not everyone's going to do that, and I don't expect everyone to, but yeah, you could tell this team is locked in. They're playing for each other, and there's real chemistry. Even Demon and Hall, who have had that weird dynamic of both are starting caliber point guards, and they're having to split minutes a lot, and that could have caused issues, but they're figuring things out. And so yeah, that goes a lot to, I think, the coaching staff, as you said, creating this culture, helping guys buy in, but then also the guys buying in and putting in that work and doing their part. And one thing that's awesome is that's also been talked about a lot is just how this team has shown that they've now figured out how to win in different ways. And any night you could have a different guy that goes off. That's a big contributor. We had the Foose game last night against Utah. It was, really nobody, but Dawson Baker kind of went up.
Yeah.
And so it can be any of these guys, and that's what's awesome, and they're happy for everybody, and so that's what's really great about this team, and has me believing more than I've believed in a BYU team for a long time.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that is they can score the ball in different ways. The depth is one great thing, and the chemistry, and everybody's bought in and everything. BYU teams in the past have had that, but they haven't had the ability that they can literally kill you in so many different ways, whether it's driving to the paint, whether it's three-point shooting, whether it's physicality on defense. They have so many different ways they can beat teams. And especially last year was the all-time one-trick pony. It was, can you shoot 35% from three?
Yeah. And we came to find out what happens when you don't, and when a team, dares you and challenges you on the threes and sells out on it. So, all right. So coming back here to this tournament, left this bracket up here. Sorry. But we've got BYU most likely. I think most people feel pretty confident it's going to be Iowa State and have a rematch, which, is fantastic TV, because these guys have had some great games in their very short time in the Big 12 together. And none more so than this last game that went into double overtime. And so what do we expect to see in a rematch? We know that Kevin Young's been able to show he can make adjustments, that he's been able to, especially after he's maybe played a team once, but I'm sure Iowa State is also going to come in. They learned some things, and obviously they played some really well against BYU the first time. Like, what do you expect to see in this rematch?
I expect it to be honestly somewhat similar to what we saw, and I'd say probably cut the turnovers by about 50%. I don't think BYU is going to have 29 turnovers against Iowa State if they have a rematch, but I would expect it to just be a close, super close game. I think it's going to be anybody's ball game, and it's going to be one of those things where who's got the ball last, 20 seconds left, tie ball game. Can they make the big shot at the end? It's not great analysis like that. I think BYU, Iowa State, I always wonder about this in the conference tournaments. Do you have an advantage already having played a game and you're not rusty? Because BYU will go into this game having 5 days of rest and whatnot, and Iowa State have just played the day before. But at the same time, they've gotten acclimated to playing in Kansas City, playing at the T-Mobile Center down there. So is that an advantage? I don't necessarily know. Iowa State's super talented. They're going to want revenge in that matchup. But I think, you look at the Vegas odds, I bet it would be BYU -2 in that game, BYU -1, basically a pick 'em at that point, and it's anybody's ball game. If I'm going to pick it in my bracket, I kind of want to pick Iowa State, and I know BYU fans might not like that.
I mean, it's tough to beat a team 2 times in a row, especially, that close together. It was a very hard fought match. we'll learn a lot. I hope if I don't honestly, I don't know what I'm hoping for because if BYU is going to lose, maybe I'd rather it just not be that close because I don't know if my heart can handle another game like the last one. I mean, it really got the point going into double overtime. I was so like my body felt exhausted, just sitting here watching. I was like, I just need this game to end one way or another.
You and
But
Downhall are cramping during the game. You're like, I'm cramping too, buddy.
went back for my pickle juice on the sideline, but no, yeah. So I'm with you. It does feel like it would be really tough to beat Iowa State again, and then what is going to be a virtual home game for them. So that's all right. Like you pointed out, like it can't really hurt BYU, but obviously we'd like to see BYU improve there and then have that other shot at Houston. And so we're kind of tackling this out of order. But out of these next guys, who would you like to see come out of this other side of the bracket? Let's say BYU is able to pull off 2 great wins. Who would you like to see in that conference championship?
As a favorable matchup, man, the one team you want to see, I know they'd have a huge home court advantage, would be Kansas, though. BYU matches up with Kansas better than any other team on the bottom half of that bracket right there, the top 8 teams in that bottom half for that matter. I think they match up super well against Kansas because BYU has
believe that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, 34-point win. Huh, I wonder what would make me believe that. Yeah, exactly. Just, BYU has shooting, Kansas doesn't. BYU has rim protection, Kansas kind of does. And a team that's in disarray. Meanwhile, BYU could not be trending higher at this moment. If Kansas were to make it to that point, they would be trending in a positive direction, obviously. But I think Kansas is the team you'd want to play for the best chance to win the Big 12. And then after that, you want to see Texas Tech. You want to see the best of the best and just keep improving your resume and say, hey, we went through the gauntlet of Iowa State, Houston, and Texas Tech. It doesn't get harder than that. The most hard-earned Big 12 title run maybe ever at that point. And I think Texas Tech is a team where if I saw them playing in San Antonio in March Madness, I wouldn't be shocked. I think this Texas Tech team ends up winning this Big 12 tournament, if I'm being honest.
They are very good, and Toppin is playing, out of his mind. So, that is no, you're making a great point, and it is no matter what happens, it's going to be a good one. I hope we do get some good games because this conference, even though maybe not as deep as we had been in past seasons, there are some really good teams here at the top and some good potential matchups. I'm just hating it because 11:30 a.m. is not convenient for just about anybody.
No, yeah. A 12:30 Eastern time tip off, that's brutal for a lot of people on the East Coast. 10:30 Mountain time. If you're doing an office job right now, that's like prime meeting time. That's when you're in your hardest meetings of the day, middle of the week, or Thursday going into Friday. So not ideal. I was also very much hoping BYU would get the late tip off as late as possible, maybe sneak into that 3 seed, but it was basically set in stone a week ago that BYU would be playing 11:30 Central local time. And so not great. We saw what happened last year. Obviously, you win one, lose one. I don't think that has any bearings on it, but it is just annoying for all the fans being like, oh, crap, I have to work my normal job and I'm having to sneak on my phone on my work computer, ESPN Plus or whatever it's on during that game. So, yeah, not ideal.
Yeah, and what stinks for me, well, I guess the silver lining, if BYU doesn't win that game, the silver lining for me is I'm actually going to miss that second one because I had made plans weeks ago, but not even thinking to check my calendar about the Big 12.
It's March, man. Come on, man. You can't be making plans in March. Every weekend in March, you got to think, okay, that might be March Madness. That might be conference tournament time. Come on, man. You got to do better than that.
I know it was a rookie mistake. I got used to, playing Portland or something on a Friday night.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
No, I'm actually going down to see your Hurricane. So with some friends. So
right on. Okay, no, that's excused then. That's okay.
Well, I'll be rooting for the other team. The Red Wings are coming to town, so I'll be with some Canes fans. But I'm, I grew up in Michigan, and I grew up rooting for the Red Wings. I have to say, I'm completely completely unengaged with hockey right now. It have been for years, ever since we left Michigan. Too hard to follow and track. It wasn't as visible as it is right now, and not as easy to watch. And I just kind of you know, it was my favorite sport growing up as a little kid. And, you know, I just don't. So
Have you
really,
been to a Canes game before? I know you're out on the East Coast.
yeah, so I went. It was preseason versus the Caps. This was, you know,
Mhm.
several years ago, so it was fun. And I hear, you know, it's a great environment and stuff. But they play, well, isn't it on NC State campus? Is it in their arena?
Yeah, so NC State basketball, it's a little like off campus. NC State's campus is massive, but the football stadium and I think it's called the Lenovo Center now. It used to be PNC. Share the same parking lot and everything. Canes games are an unbelievable environment. It's a ton of fun.
Well, yeah, I look forward to it being a real game. And actually, it's kind of embarrassing. So I had a Red Wings shirt in my closet for basically forever. You know, this is one I brought with me from like high school, had with me. I almost never wore because I was never watching hockey, and it's
Yeah.
red. And so I try to avoid wearing red, you know, as much as possible. And for obvious reasons. And my wife like got rid of it like maybe 6 months ago within this last year sometime. And so now I like don't even and I don't own red clothing. So now I don't even, you know what I'm going to do. I'll wear my Tigers hat though. And that should be, that'll have to be good enough.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll wear my BYU hat because they'll be hopefully playing at that time.
yeah, and you'll stick out like a sore thumb in that arena, and they're like, "Are you a Duke fan? You know, wearing that royal blue around here?" But yeah, no, it's I'm a Liverpool fan. I was wearing a Liverpool hoodie. I used to work at BYU TV, and I remember walking into BYU TV one day, and I wore a red Liverpool hoodie, and I'm getting all these dirty looks from people, and I'm going, "What's going on?" Like I'm just Am I like, do I have something on my face? What, my hair's messed up or something? And then multiple people started coming up to me and like, oh, it takes a lot to wear red, red in here and whatnot. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is a Liverpool shirt. I didn't know it was that big of a deal.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Well, I mean, rightfully so. How dare you wear red on campus? But yeah, I, I don't know. It should be a lot of fun. I don't know. I look forward to it, but I'm pretty bummed because I'd really love to catch it if BYU does move
just
on. But
just be the guy with your phone out. You got to keep up with. I mean, especially if it's BYU versus Houston, you're not going to be able to help yourself. You're going to have that game streaming on your phone as long as the Wi-Fi is good enough.
which I doubt it will be, but
Yeah.
it never seems to be. But yeah, so anyway, making that scheduling announcement now, there probably won't be any live post-game announcement after that game if BYU does make it. But if they make it to the championship, I don't care that it's on 5 p.m. Oh no, that would be 6 Eastern, right in the middle of the evening, family time and everything. I'll be watching that.
There we go. That's what matters. Make sure you're there for the championship, and then
Yeah.
and then March Madness. No matter what happens, first round, there it doesn't matter what time they're playing. You got to be able to watch them during the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I'll make sure to be scheduling some time, blocking out time for some meetings or whatever during then, because there's no way I'll be watching every second of that. So awesome. So last question. So you mentioned you are, you're from Carolina. You grew up a Duke fan, which no shame. Like I mentioned, I grew up in Michigan. I also rooted for Michigan and Michigan State, whatever. But so I won't hold it too much against you. But BYU and Duke face off in the finals, NCAA March Madness finals. Who are you rooting for?
I keep getting this question from everybody in my life. People are DMing me this question too. Look, I'm an unbiased journalist. We're credentialed media, so we're not allowed to pick sides in this one. So I just hope both teams have fun. And no, I'm kidding. I would root for BYU in that matchup. I really would. I'm not just saying that either. Being a BYU alum, I think you root for your alum 1-1 no matter what. I think they are above whatever school you rooted for as a child or whatever. If you went to that school, they should be 1-1, and then you go with the team too. And also, as I've seen Duke, reach the mountaintop, and BYU, without question, I would root for BYU over Duke.
Good answer. Yeah, that's the right answer. When BYU went to play Michigan, I'd kind of flirted with, do I go up there? Do I go catch that game? But my wife was due around that time. It was still, more or less, it was close enough that I was like, I don't want to leave the state around that time. Of course, that ended up saving me a trip all the way to Michigan to watch a horrendous game against Michigan. But yeah, I would have been all BYU in that one. It's not even close. Especially now with the power conferences or these super conferences, whatever the way they're going, it's kind of turning me off even more from Michigan. Like it's hard to be really invested in all these things when they're just really screwing over everybody else at this point. So
100%.
My loyalties there are waning a bit, but anyway, well, really good. I do have to say, I should have said this at the top of the show. Everyone needs to make sure to go check out your show. You guys do some really good stuff. I'm pretty new to discovering you guys, and I've been listening to all the stuff you've been putting out. You get some great guests on there recently. You had like Eric Mika and some others, as well as just some great analysis and fun stuff. So do go check out Karter with the Church Ball Pod, and I'll make sure to have links to your Twitter, your YouTube, and whatever. You guys are on all the platforms though, so I'll put all that down in the comments. So make sure you guys go check them out. Anything else that you want to plug or say?
No, it just had a great time. It's always fun talking BYU hoops. This is the best time of the year, like I said. And to plug, make sure to go check out the Eric Mika interview. It's not just, none of it's really timely. He was just telling stories basically for an hour, and we were doing it at the free throw line of a church gym. So it was a lot of fun, and shout out to him for sitting down with us. He was talking about playing against LeBron in his one NBA game, playing against Wemby in that Metropolitans 92 and G League Ignite stuff, and BYU recruiting stories, and the Lone Peak days, and he talks about this team as well. Really, really good interview there. We also talked to Dallin Hall as well. Quick 25-minute interview there, so go check that out as well. A lot of good stuff, and we'll be doing live reactions and the whole 9 yards during March Madness as well.
Yeah, go check them out. Subscribe to all their stuff, and it's really good, and it's been a lot of fun listening to you guys, and I've really appreciated having you on. Some really good insights, and all right, well, awesome. Well, thanks so much. Also, before you go check out his stuff, be sure to like this video, subscribe here if you haven't already, and yeah, same thing. Be back throughout March Madness. We'll be covering BYU, and then ultimately after they hang the banner for both the Big 12 and the NCAA championships that BYU is about to get, we'll come back and wrap up the season. So, all right, appreciate it, and as always, go Cougs.
There we go. Love it. Appreciate you having me on.